John.
Hi.
I'm visiting with John F. Barnes, the father of modern myofascial release. Thank you, John, for meeting with me and sharing your wonderful insights with the world. In 2014, we met and we discussed the nature of myofascial release and what makes it unique. That interview is available on YouTube and Functional Therapy Magazine for people who want a great foundation in the MFR. In this interview, I want us to go further and explore some of the deeper concepts and the expansive science and art that is myofascial release, the myofascial release approach. I sometimes think we're all blind people, all touching the elephant, and we're all of whatever that is, of healing and treatment and living. And so, John, can you share with us just what you think of as the essence and the scope of what you consider to be the myofascial release approach?
Well, the scope of it is the totality of the human being. And as far as therapists go, our focus is helping to relieve pain, restore function. But there's some very interesting things that we've discovered about the fascial system, and it helps us get into a deeper level of consciousness that most of us didn't even realize was available to us. And that level of consciousness is really what helps us to heal. And what I've seen over the years is we are capable of healing ourselves. So as a therapist, we were sort of taught to fix people. And from this approach, it's more like we are facilitators. We're guiding them, applying certain principles that help to bring out the best in them and help them discover blockages within them that basically have gotten in the way from them improving.
Yeah, that's the nutshell. But so during your own experience, you've learned a lot from just being centered and paying close attention, as well as listening to your inner warrior. Can you share with us like this early experiences as a therapist and as a person, and how it helped you develop this form of treatment?
You mean as far as my trauma went and what woke me up?
Yes, that's part of it,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
I was very intuitive as a boy, and I think most of us are intuitive. But also, school kind of beats that out of us, demands we be logical, linear. And so you lose a lot of it in school. You don't have time for it. In fact, it's ridiculed in school a lot. You know, I'm sure most of you at some point, if a teacher had said to you, "Oh, it's only your intuition," you know, and they took away the most valuable faculty you possess. So I had an accident. I was an athlete, and I traumatized my back. I herniated the disc at L5, and that pretty much woke me up. It took away the things that I love the most, motion and competition, in an instant. So my life became quite a struggle after that, and I was shocked that traditional therapy didn't work. Temporarily, but not for a very long period of time. And so I sort of started out this journey just to help myself, because there was a point, I had spinal surgery, fusion at L5, and that did help the pain, but I still hurt a lot and I still couldn't move that well. And as an athlete, I was very frustrated. So then I started to treat myself, and it's helped me to discover my potential.
You were already a physical therapist at the time of your injury?
No, it happened before I was a PT.
Yeah.
And I was always fascinated with the mind-body concept as an athlete. So part of my reason for going to PT school was to explore that, and also to help my back pain.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, it didn't help my back pain, and they didn't have a clue about the mind-body concept. And here we are, over 50 years later, and they still don't have a concept. In fact, they still ridicule it. It's kind of sad. But it's very real, it's very important, and as we get into that, and there's certain principles allow us to get tapped into that, then it becomes a very powerful experience that helps everybody.
Yeah. So basically that experience with your weightlifting injury and then the spinal fusion, the treatments, you got a real inside view of healthcare, the whole healthcare system.
Yeah.
And what is the modern medical approach really effective with? And where do you think it could stand to develop and improve?
Well, the modern medical approach, it's basically symptom-oriented. All forms of therapy also are symptom-oriented. And as you get into this, you realize that symptoms are just the tip of the iceberg. And so the myofascial approach allows us to get into the very depths of the human being without ever traumatizing anybody. And it's something everybody can learn. And as we begin to explore that, some really wonderful things happen. We definitely need physicians, we need medication at times, we'll need surgery at times too. One of the things I say in the seminar is that except in an emergency, always have myofascial release first. Obviously, in an emergency situation, it's very important that you see your doctor. However, too many times surgeries are done, and then, as you know, there's so many failed surgeries. So with myofascial release, the worst that can happen is nothing, because we never use force. And it'll either eliminate some surgeries, or at least it's setting the person up for a more successful result. And I believe that everybody should have myofascial release after every surgery, as soon as the healing has completed, and after every delivery of every child, both mother and child.
Mm-hmm. And typically you recommend like 6 weeks, or how much, or even less, for certain surgeries, or
6 to 8 weeks. Yeah.
6 to 8 weeks, all over the surgical site.
You can do off-the-body energy work almost immediately after any trauma or any surgery, because you're not going to touch them, so you're not going to injure them. And it's very controversial, but it also happens to be very effective. I go with results, and let the research catch up, you know.
I agree. So the modern scientific approach, we'll stay on this tack here, is kind of confined itself to testing small, provable aspects of healthcare and biology. What have you learned as you try to synthesize a more complete view of the interactions of biological and other systems?
Well, they're not separate the way we were taught. They're all integrated together. I have great respect for scientists that work with computers and build bridges, that type of thing. But that's the linear world. But they try to apply those principles to a human being that's not linear. Everything we learned as a therapist was linear. The techniques that developed from that linear perspective also basically viewed the person and from that very limited point of view. In actuality, we're fractals. And the problem is that science was the basis of science is objectivity. So they tried to make us objects. And so to do that, they had to eliminate consciousness. So in so eliminating consciousness, they basically kept most techniques on a very superficial level. We're not a bunch of widgets to be stacked up and quantified. We have a consciousness. It's very important. It cannot be separated. It defines your moment-by-moment experience as a human being. What the scientists don't look at is the meta-paradigm. That's the paradigm that underlines all other paradigms and theories. So if the meta-paradigm is flawed, all the theories based upon that are going to be flawed too, and that's what happened to us. There was two basic questions. Does consciousness matter or does it not matter? So science chose that it didn't matter because it was inconvenient for research. So unfortunately, it's led to very limited results, very expensive way of achieving something that only lasts temporarily for most people. Mm-hmm. And that's the bane for the bane of most traditional alternative therapies is the temporary results. So it's disastrous, basically.
Most traditional and alternative.
Exactly. Yeah.
Some of your critics have focused on the aspects of the description of processes that are harder to put into words. What are some of the challenges in teaching some of the concepts that are more experiential? People have to feel them to believe them almost, right?
Right. I have critics? Big surprise.
I'm sorry to let you know about this.
Well, this is the key to this, is that you cannot satisfy anybody intellectually about the myofascial theory. It has to be felt, has to be experienced, and then it becomes plausible. So the fact that some people think you can't release the fascia. I hear that all the time. What they're not understanding is we're not releasing the basic structure of the fascia and its limits. What we're releasing is the ground substance that lies within the three-dimensional web. The fascial system is a three-dimensional web, but there's not space in there. It's ground substance, which is fluid. So what happens when you become traumatized is the ground substance starts to solidify. So it's like everything shrinks up and tightens and starts to crush nerves and blood vessels that lie through there. Limits our motion, creates pain, spasm, spasticity. So there's a fallacy about what we're actually doing because they haven't experienced it. And also, we have to apply principles that deal with the fluid system. All the research in the past on the fascial system has been done on cadavers. Cadavers are brittle. So they just looked at the fibrous web and they paid no attention to the ground substance. There's a new book out called Ground Substance Extracellular Matrix by an Alfred Feisinger, who's one of Germany's leading scientists. He's researched the fascial system now for 30 years. And one of the key things he says is that the ground substance is the environment of every cell of our body. So, in the neuronal theory that you and I were taught, everything comes from the brain and neural system, is fallacious because we have close to 100 trillion cells now. We have a nerve that can only conduct one signal at a time, 20 meters per second. So it becomes impossible for the neuronal theory to be plausible because it's totally impossible. How could you stimulate 100 trillion cells or close to it instantaneously in a coordinated fashion? Science tends to look at this kind of a random effect. Well, it's just implausible. So, as we free up the ground substance, everything you eat must go through the ground substance. The fascia is the container of your fluid. It is the main transport medium of your body, and the food you eat, the air you breathe, the water you drink. The biochemistry, the hormones, the energy, the information that must go to every cell to allow it to thrive must go through the ground substance. Nobody's paid attention to that. Couldn't be more important. Then, as we get into the cell, there is something called a cytoskeleton, which is a microfascial system. And within there are microtubules. When the cell goes to excrete, it now has to go through the ground substance to get to the lymphatic system. So it is the ground substance that is the key, and we need to use fluid dynamics basically because it's a fluid system to allow it to release. So instead of brute force the way it's been done in the past, that's the old way of doing myofascial release. Basically you use very gentle sustained pressures. As you apply the pressure, and the art of it is to find the restriction. So I teach everybody how to center themselves so they can feel accurately into the body. The protocols we were taught are pretty close to useless because they don't really apply to the patient on the table. And the fascial restrictions in our body are unique to us. So there's somewhere close to 7 billion people on this earth, and every one of them has a unique fascial strain pattern. So the art of it is to feel their strain pattern. Then you apply gentle sustained pressure without brute force. If you use too much force, the mind goes into protection. If you use too little force, you don't engage the collagenous barrier. So the proper pressure is important, then the amount of time is important. It takes about 90 to 120 seconds to even begin to engage the collagenous barrier, and that's the part that all forms of therapy have ignored. It's been too quick. You think about all the things we learn to do as therapists. Manipulation, mobilization, muscle energy, massage, exercise, they're all wonderful, but they only release 20% of the fascial system. That's why you have temporary results. In gravity, the collagenous barrier is what rules. It's so powerful. So that when you go through trauma, the fascial system, when it becomes restricted, does not show up in any of the standard testing. So it's been completely missed or misdiagnosed. It then begins to generate tensile strengths of somewhere up to 2,000 pounds per square inch. It's crushing pressure. It's the equivalent of 2 full-grown horses standing on a nerve. So this is what gets down to the cause of pain, restriction of motion. And so it's the solidification of the ground substance that starts to cause these big problems in our body. And going back to Dr. Feisinger's work, all of this must be fluid enough to be able to get to the cells so it can function and thrive. So we've missed something so huge in healthcare, it's incomprehensible.
Yeah. You know, so that's the very physical explanation for it, as well as the feeling that people are getting. You talk a lot about channel 3 and channel 5, which are terms you use just to help us to understand a different modes of working of the mind. Can you elaborate a little bit for us about that?
Yeah. A very simplistic way of looking at consciousness, and I've labeled our intellectual, rational side as channel 5. The problem is that we don't heal in an orderly, controlled environment. That describes traditional healthcare. You don't heal on the intellectual side. The beauty of myofascial release is that it naturally, efficiently, and effectively, and totally safely switches us into what I call channel 3. That's the intuitive, instinctive side. That's the healing zone. It's also our creative side. It's what I refer to as our filial intelligence. Another word for our filial intelligence is wisdom, and it's vast. So channel 5 has been basically our whole life. It was the way we were educated. We were told that's the only valuable form of consciousness, basically. Channel 5 is our negative, fearful, judgmental, critical side. What a wonderful way to live. That describes our society. It's getting out of control. So, we need channel 5, we need our intellect, but it's a servo mechanism. But we identified with the tool, and the tool began to dominate our life. So what myofascial release does, in addition to helping us relieve pain and restore function, it helps us to really tap into this level of consciousness that we all have as humans. We're all born with it. So our life can be more productive, more joyful, and more healthy. And it's in that realm, the intuitive, instinctive side, where true healing occurs. But going back to what I just said a little earlier, if somebody's using too much force, the mind is in protection. It's not doing anything but protecting you, so it doesn't help you. So when you use the proper pressures, what begins to happen is the mind is capable now of healing us. And the fascial system is a flow system. So the system must be open so the fluid can flow, and within the fluid, the nutrients, air, everything can flow through there to the cellular level the way it was meant to. Okay.
He's having fun over there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that talks really to the, sorry, 1 second.
Thank you.
Real life happening right in front of us. So I think that's the hardest thing for me to get, or has been very difficult to find myself in that intuitive, instinctive mode. And that's the challenge, right? You're teaching people to go into channel 3 more.
Yeah. So what you're saying is it's the difficulty most of us have tapping into our intuition.
Letting go.
Yeah, yeah. Our society told us never to let go, as if it was some kind of a bad thing. And so it brings up a lot of fear. You and I were also taught not to ever express our fear, to dampen it down, to deny it. And when so doing, what we didn't realize was we were solidifying the ground substance of the fascial system, which can turn into physical restrictions, that can turn into physiological distress, pain, headaches, fibromyalgia, all those different labels that were given for that, you know. So the more we can allow ourselves to feel naturally, the more capable we become of not only tapping into our intuition, but healing. You have to feel to heal. It's not about thinking and force, not about willpower. It's about trusting the deeper parts of us that we were all born with, and we need a therapist to help us get there to a certain point. And then we teach everybody to treat themselves so they can save money and take care of themselves for the rest of their life.
You've taught over 100,000 therapists, doctors, and other body workers. What are some of the main challenges people for people as they start to use these methods? Like, how can they try to overcome them?
Well, we have to treat ourselves. The seminars help a lot. It helps to have an open mind. There's nothing more limited than a skeptic with a closed mind. And a lot of therapists are trained to be skeptics. And we should be skeptical. There's a lot of garbage out there. But I think we should be skeptics with an open mind also. There's always the possibility of the new. To me, it's healthcare is missing what I call the 3 C's: curiosity, compassion, and courage. It takes courage to change. We need to be curious and explore different avenues. And certainly we need to be compassionate with ourselves and other people too. So healthcare has kind of drifted away from all that.
Mm-hmm. So in my own experience, after leaving the courses, I feel very comfortable, and my patients seem to really respond. Like at different times, I've had more people spontaneously unwinding during sessions, and other times I find myself having a feeling of wanting to really perform. I had a little insight during an exercise just the other day where I felt that the therapist I was working with was moving me. I think I don't have to do anything. You repeat it over and over for us, but can you share again, like, your advice to therapists who are working too hard?
Yeah, a very common experience in the beginning seminars is that as the person is starting to let go on the treatment table, the therapist, we were brought up to think we had to fix people, to do things to them. And it shuts the person down. In fact, it angers them significantly. And unfortunately, that is explaining traditional therapy most of the time. So that the whole idea is we have to get the concept that this can be fairly effortless. It doesn't require brute force. It doesn't require logic. And somehow we have the capacity within us to heal ourselves, but it can be a much more gentle way. And it's hard for us to break the ways we spend a lot of time and money and effort on our education, only to find out that it's been sort of a blind alley. It only produces temporary results too many times. So we've got to get past that now, and we can with this.
I think we can. Your students, obviously this room is filled with just tables now, but there's a lot of us that are learning from you. We get this feeling from you, John, that, I have this feeling in your presence of, your energy, your power. What do you think this is, and how did you develop it?
Well, I think we're born with it. And then I think, as I said a little earlier, it sort of got beat out of us in school and our society, some of the limitations that are imposed upon us by society. Our education wasn't really a true education. It was more like a mass hypnosis. But we all bought the story. I bought the story for a long time, too. So I had to be broken to wake up myself. So it's a form of awakening. The Channel 5 level of consciousness, in psychological terms, it's called consensus consciousness. And another word for that is trance. So without realizing it, we've been in a form of a trance when we're in our intellectual, rational Channel 5 mentality, without even realizing it. We had no way of breaking out of it, and we get ridiculed if we try to do something different. So there's something about myofascial release that taps into this deeper level of awareness that breaks you out of the trance. You start to wake up. You start to find your own inner power. We all have an inner power. We all have an amazing wisdom. And it just takes us a little time. And I recommend every therapist, every physician that I train, use these techniques to treat themselves. It's not selfish. It's important, and I believe it's our responsibility to be mentally strong, physically strong, emotionally stable. And then we can be the example for our patients. So this somehow brings out this inner power that we all have. And it's incredible. It's really incredible. And then we can do that for our patients and our clients, because that's what healing is all about. They take on their own power eventually.
So your suggestion for a therapist is just to be open and centered and just
get treated regularly.
We have treated.
We have to get treated regularly to accomplish that, and treat ourselves regularly. I treat myself every day. If my spinal fusion has broken down, so if I didn't treat myself every day, I probably wouldn't be walking today. So, I mean, I have more strength. I'm 77. I have more strength than most 20-year-olds. And I'm not bragging, but it's just this keeps you alive. You don't have to rust out.
So if anyone wants to wrestle you,
go for it. I'll probably regret it the next day.
So, do you have suggestions for patients and clients who are how they can get the most out of their myofascial release approach experience?
Well, part of it is quieting down during treatment, and that's a hard thing for most people. We're so used to talking and thinking constantly. So part of this is an educational process too. First couple visits, it's a matter of getting them used to being touched and feel the releases. You bring your attention to what it feels like. When the fascia releases, I describe it as butter melting or taffy stretching, something like that. And then after a couple visits, if they tend to be talking a lot, then I start to suggest the possibility that it would be better if we both quiet down so we can feel, because the key to this is feeling, not thinking about it so much. And most people in a fairly short period of time start to get that. There's some that are kind of compulsive, will never get it. It'll still help them, but not to the depths of the possibilities. So that being silent, taking responsibility, and treating yourself the way the therapist teaches them to take care of themselves, exercising, all of that thing, given some time, will help them in a very significant way.
Excellent. So, for people who are wanting to learn more about the myofascial release approach and how they can regain their best lives, what would you recommend?
Well, my book, Healing Ancient Wounds, is very helpful on the intuitive, instinctive side. My first book, Myofascial Release, The Search for Excellence, is more the technical side, so you can learn out of the book to get started if you want. And then, we give seminars all around the country all the time, so a good place to start would be Myofascial 1, where we have a pediatric course as a starting point too. We also have a fascial pelvis course, which is a starting point for a lot of therapists. And then you just progress from there with the other seminars. And so 20 other seminars at least.
Wow. There are also for patients, clients, people that want to experience just that in a healing seminar.
Yeah, we have a myofascial healing seminar for the patients, and they love it. We teach them how to treat themselves, how to treat their loved ones. They get treated while they're there. I go over a lot of slides and DVDs for them to show you the new information that's come up about the fascial system. And there's therapists that go too, because you just make big changes in a short period of time. There's a wonderful new book out, Living Human Fascial System, and it's by a French hand surgeon.
Dr. Kaine.
Kaine, thank you. I can never get his name right. He's done some wonderful things, and as a hand surgeon, he was becoming increasingly distressed that as he was working on living human beings, it didn't match what he learned in medical school. So he spent close to 30 years of his life researching the fascial system now. And he's come up with this amazing photography, basically, of living fascia. Because in school, we were told just cut that away when we were dissecting the cadavers. Cut that away, throw it away. And that was the level of importance it was given. And unfortunately, too many places that's still the case, but everything's flip-flopping now. So all the research is coming along to, back up pretty much what I've taught over 40-some years now. So that's, nice, makes it easier.
Absolutely. Well, I actually remember I had the first cadaver lab. There were two, the PTs and OTs all had the same cadaver to work on. And it was very difficult. The first cadaver lab has to do everything with removing the fascia, but we didn't know that we were maybe handling the most precious material in our bodies.
Yeah, it's come a long ways, but got a ways to go yet.
Thank you so much, John, for your time, and I just appreciate so much you and what you're doing for the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. I think you're great, and I really appreciate your openness too. So it's great being with you.
Thanks. I maybe take one moment, because I think to follow on that communication idea, that neuron, if there's a single neuronal theory, it can't get down to there. So I had posted, and I've written a little bit about this, so I could share my fasciculation theory, or the body coordination theory through fascia. This idea that all of the muscle fibers, all the fascicles, are actually communicating side by side with each other. So as soon as you stretch a muscle fiber, it's actually pulling on the fascia that communicates with the next muscle fiber, next muscle fascicle, and says, hey, we're going. And I was thinking that was explaining the initial fasciculations I'm feeling when I'm doing myofascial release. I feel like I've made a change in it, and because the neuron's not telling the muscle to move, but the muscle is saying, I think we're moving, we gotta go.
Right.
There might be more corroboration for the thing. I'd love to be able to watch it with Dr. Gimberto.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good being with you.
Good being with you. I'm so excited to be here this week.
It was good to see you let go today too. That was really helpful.